What you're going to do is, like, I think this is pretty common, is I start to kind of move my hips around in a circle. It's a small circle now, it's not a big circle. And what I'm looking for when I go one way or the other way, I'm looking to listen to what my body is telling me in terms of tightness. And again, I can feel it on my left side. It's not a pain, it just feels tighter than that area, right? And then this circle slowly becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And I hope everybody always knows to constantly breathe, like I'm talking now because I'm teaching you, but generally, I'm always asking students to constantly be breathing. So in through the nose and out through the mouth. And not to force the air in or out, but just to kind of let it get deeper because you're relaxing, not because you're trying to force more air, right? So I start to kind of turn my hips, and slowly it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and change directions a little bit. There we go. Good. And then I'll stay still. And this is part of, like, always my training is to pay attention to how you feel in the different times and parts of your training. So I pay attention to how my back had felt before I started the circles. Now I sit here and I feel it definitely a little bit looser in my hips. Like I feel the hips are, if I look at what my shoulders could do, I mean, I want my hips to be able to do the same thing. Still not as much as my shoulders, but we're going to work on it for sure. So I'm going to put my hands on my hips now, and I'm going to start to kind of push in the direction that I have. Like I feel tighter over here, so I'm going to start to kind of push towards that side. And it was interesting, you couldn't hear it on the video for sure, but when I pushed in, I heard a clunk or an adjustment in my back. So I'm physically moving the bones to one side, in this case, and then physically moving the bones to the other side. And I heard another adjustment on this side now. Wasn't a loud pop, but it was a small light. And then now I'm going to kind of push at a 45-degree, kind of that way. It's not a hard push, just I'm giving my pelvis and my hips just a slight direction. The same with back, right? I'm kind of pushing them back. And I'm just pushing my hips a little bit further back than they normally go, and I'm just kind of relaxing into it. So I'll do that for a little bit. I'll push them forward, so I've got my hands on my hips, and I'm pushing forward, and I'm trying to get to the point where I relax into that. And I'll do the same on that side again, kind of do it a few times. And every time I do it, like a second time, I try to relax more, whether it's into the push and allow the push to push me further that way. So I'm really training my body to relax into things, not to resist them, right? I want to really, under some pressure, like this case, my hand to my hip, I'm trying to teach this to relax on the push and this to relax on being pushed and letting it just kind of move me. Very good. And then I'm going to stop. I'm going to give my legs a quick shake. And now when I sit still again, and I compare it to when I started, to when I did the rolls of the hips, and now I did the pushing of the hips in different directions. And there's really hundreds. I mean, I could do it one at a time. I could do it left and right, forward, backwards, and every angle that I could imagine. But when I analyze the third thing, so nothing, rolling my hips, pushing my hips, they feel more relaxed for sure. The two adjustments I got from pushing left and right, there's a different lightness to my hips. I don't feel them pulling so much, which is a good thing. So that's always a good thing. You want to pay attention to those things. Now, and with the hip mobility, I like to also add like some different layers to this as well. So let me just turn the camera, point it down a little bit more so you can see what I'm going to do. So I like to get on the ground, right? And I'm staying nice and straight. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to pick up one hip and I'm going to move it back. And I start kind of walking with like my bum, I guess, right? Forwards and backwards. I'm not really using my legs. My legs are just kind of dragging along. But essentially, I'm doing this with my hips, one at a time. One shoulder, like one hip, the other hip. And I'm moving forward a little bit, or backwards in this case, sorry, and forward. And I'm trying to really kind of relax my whole body as I'm doing this, right? And what's happening is I'm starting to move the hips independent, like one shoulder, the other, one shoulder, the other. And it's a small movement. It's not a big movement, right? But that's really what it's about. When you look at this movement, it's much smaller than, let's say, the elbow. It's much smaller than the hand, right? So the hips are the same. There's smaller movements than the knees. There's smaller movement than the feet. So I'm just kind of moving them. And then I can even move in such a way that I start doing circles, right? And I find this kind of work really, really relaxing because it starts to, if you could imagine the pelvic, area going like this. We don't usually do that. And I think that it feels good. It's much like rolling your shoulders feels good if you've been, like this all day, right? Imagine sitting on your hips, sitting in a chair, especially if it's too soft, like a really soft chair that's not very supportive. It's like your body sinks into it and it loses its structure and muscles start to become tight because they're trying to support you because there's no structural support in the chair, even though maybe it feels comfy. Very much like a bed for me. Like I like a hard bed. That's me. I find soft beds, softer mattresses and beds. I end up a mess in the morning. I just feel like really all locked up. So I really like a firmer bed. And the same with the chair. I just find that it leads to less problems in my low back. So this is a really nice thing. And I'll even rock into it a little bit more, right? Like I'll kind of, I'll relax more into that, like to the point where the leg or the hip that's up is really kind of, I start to kind of move it a little bit more, not far off the ground. Like I'm literally just an inch off the ground. And I'm paying attention to what happens to that hip, right? So I'm kind of go to one side and, and I'm just moving, lifting my knee, putting it down. So I'm really up on one, like I'm on one hip and the other hip is in the air and the leg is also in the air. It doesn't have to be high, as you can see, it's like barely off the ground. So it shouldn't be too hard. I just start to move my leg and you can swing it or you can place it down whenever it feels tired, but you're on one leg. And my arms are just kind of really, I don't know, I'm keeping them out of the mix. And they're on the ground. They could be if you wanted to add some more support. But if you keep them on your thighs, you'll tend to feel more of a balance. You'll tend to develop a better balance. Like right now, I'm balancing on the side of my leg and my hip, and my body is kind of holding its own. Same with backwards. So I start moving from one leg to the other leg, and with awareness and with focus, I'm trying to dial in my hips and this area. I mean, I could think about lots of things, but cultivating precise thoughts, awareness, focus is not, it's an all the time thing, right? Sometimes we're training and we're we're doing too many things. I try to just focus in this case about the hips. Like, yes, you know, maybe my hand is touching, or maybe I feel my stomach working because I'm kind of like this or something. But my main focus is in my hip right now, and trying to understand the one that's in the air and kind of moving it, right? So I'm really looking for, the leg will be moving, but my big thing is in the hip. It's right in, and it's like I'm paying attention to almost exactly the joint or the socket. Not so much maybe tight muscles or something. I'm really paying attention to that joint, trying to understand, you know, if it can move smoothly, if it feels like tighter back here, of course, a little bit because it's an awkward position. But, you know, that difference between restriction and tightness, right? Like trying to find out where things are not moving. And you can simply put your hand on that area just to kind of feel it. And I'm a big fan of creativity and opening up your creativity and seeing creativity or building that into your training. So, you know, from different positions, I'll move my legs, right? And, you know, but again, just because I'm moving my ankle and my knee, I'm not really focusing. I'm letting those things happen. I'm really trying to keep my awareness in the hips. Great. So when I stop now and just sit, I can feel a big difference in my hips. I can feel a noticeable difference in how they feel. Now I'm going to stand up and I'm going to try, it's the camera here. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning, sit still. Yeah, and I can definitely feel a different lightness to my hips, even more than before. So what I find interesting about when I say this about the hips is that when I walk forward now, it's like I'm walking with my hips under me. So I see when people are kind of stressed, it's like, or they're in a rush, or they're like forward, the shoulders or the head leads the way. When your hips are really relaxed, you know, where that posture comes from, you see that the hips are always under the shoulders and under the head, right? That's why when you look at any of the great dancers, whether they're ballet or, you know, any dance really, I love watching the old dancers like Fred Astaire and stuff, and just look how light-footed they are, and look at how the hips always are under the shoulders and head. You know, and they're just free to move. You can see that the hip is free to move backwards. The hip is free to move forwards, right? It's like the whole leg feels a freedom because the hips are loose. And this is true for, I mean, in martial arts, when you look at the kicking arts, the arts that are good with kicks, they usually have a freedom in the hips, okay? That you don't really find in other places. Really loose. Same with dancing, I guess. Same idea. But I still remember some of my friends that were really good in martial arts with their kicks. Their hips were like not even there. It was like gone. It just the transfer of power came from the body. It went through the hips and to the leg where they needed it. The same with people that can punch. The shoulders are really quite relaxed in the strike. They're not, the shoulders are not inhibited in the shoulder. So if we go outside of martial arts, if you look at a baseball pitcher throwing a ball, the shoulders are really relaxed. If you look at a soccer player kicking a ball hard and far, usually it's with a very smooth leg movement, and the hips are not involved at all. They just transfer the power. So now that's just some ways. You can do the exact same thing from standing that you just did on the ground, right? If your balance is not that good, that's always been the limiting factor for me that I see. At the beginning, maybe find something like a wall just to give you some balance. And you're starting to move, again, your leg, but the focus is on the hip. And there's two patterns I like the most. I'll just face you for this. But so I'll give you an example. This is like my foot. So the first is I make kind of a circle pattern, and the circle can get bigger or smaller, and I could do a circle over here, I could do a circle in front of me, I could do a circle behind. So as I'm moving my leg, I'm doing these circles in little different places, like behind me, right? Like behind me, beside me, or maybe in front of me a little bit, right? That's a good pattern. And I'll change the angle of my foot. So either it can be pointed down or heel down or just natural. And those different foot patterns or foot placement will change the muscles, how the muscles work in the legs. So if I put my hand up and I have my hand up like this group of muscles work. If I do that, that group of muscles works. And if I go in, this group of muscles, if I go out, that group of muscles. So different hand positions and the different feet positions will activate different muscles on the leg. And not that I want to build muscle, I just need to know how they affect my hip, because it will affect it. Then the other pattern is a figure 8, okay? So you make kind of like an infinity symbol, right? So that's what you're doing with your feet, in one direction and in the other direction. And what you're doing is you're really looking for a smoothness in your hip. You're looking for real nice smoothness in your hip. And you can go both ways, both directions. So the leg just kind of tags along, much like if I was doing that figure 8 with my shoulder, right? The shoulder just is hanging there, the arm is going along. So I'm doing these figure 8 positions with both my legs. And again, you can use a wall if the balance is not good that day or today or whenever, or stick or something that will, or even a partner. If you have a friend, you can kind of hold each other and kind of do this. It's a great way of checking how your hips are doing. You want them good and loose. And again, the figure 8 can be quite small, or you can make the figure 8 quite big, right? It just depends on your balance. I find the big figure 8 a little bit easier because I can sway in it, right? Like I can kind of like swim in it. Whereas the smaller figure 8, it's much more challenging to manage. Not that it's right or wrong. You do whichever one you like. Just find the bigger one a tiny bit easier. So my hip closes, opens, closes, opens. And you really, I'm going to stop. And now, yeah, the hips feel really, they feel really like, every once in a while I'll try with my shoulders, and I say, can I do the same thing with my hips? I roll the shoulders forward, can I roll my hips forward? And this is an interesting one too. It's like let me see if I can show you with my hands. It's like I roll forward, I roll backwards. So it's like, I'm just putting maybe you can see it better, but I'm rolling my hip forward. It's a small movement, right? I'm rolling it back, I'm rolling it up, down, back, forward. The same on the other side, right? Up, down, forward,